Let's take you to this now. Apple has suspended the purchase of minerals from the Democratic Republic of Congo after the country filed a criminal complaint against the tech giant. Apple disputes allegations of using conflict minerals in its products, while DRC lawyers argue that this usage connects the company to ongoing crimes in the region. Joining us via video link to discuss this further is Peter Major, Director of Mining at Modern Corporate Solutions. Peter, thank you so much for your time this morning. So we know that countries like the DRC, for instance, Sierra Leone and Venezuela and others are currently in some form of conflict. As we get your reaction on what is happening in the DRC specifically, perhaps let's start with your interpretation then of conflict minerals and how widespread the use of these minerals is globally.
Globally, it's getting larger all the time, and it's really, really tragic. But historically, Africa was mined by quite large companies that were pretty organized, fairly well regulated, and they were monitored. But when each of the African countries obtained independence, it shortly afterwards nationalized all these mines, and unfortunately, it's not able to manage all these areas and all these mines. And so what's going on in the DRC is what's now starting to happen in South Africa, is you have syndicates and warlords and militias controlling the minerals. And we know the DRC is a very large country. It's double the size of South Africa. It's larger than Greenland, larger than Saudi Arabia. It's 2/3 the size of Europe. And you got 75 million people there, but not a very strong centralized government. So we sometimes call them rogue provinces or renegade provinces. The centralized government cannot control its provinces, and a lot of those provinces are infiltrated with militia groups. They say there's 120 militia groups in just the small eastern provinces of the DRC. So I can understand the centralized government. They say Apple and a lot of these tech companies are using minerals mined and sold by the renegades, by the militias. And if we can cut off their source of money, then we cut off their source of arms, and maybe the government can get them under control. But I don't think that's going to be possible. You need the whole world to step in. Apple's done an amazing job of trying to track where its minerals come from, but you can have so many middlemen. Look at the U.S. trying to sanction Russia. You know, there's so many middlemen dealing in Russia's materials that it's almost impossible to stop the flow. So these syndicates, they have very sophisticated networks. It's a chicken and egg. As a country becomes out of control, it loses control of its minerals, who mines them, who sells them, who gets the revenue.
So, Peter, you seem to be of the understanding, of course, that Apple is doing a good thing here. Are you saying that they were not at all aware of, the use of these conflict minerals by the middlemen, as you call them? Because we know, of course, that the DRC had to file a criminal complaint against the tech giant. Are companies like Apple not aware where their minerals come from necessarily?
They may not know the original source of supply, and that the world is getting better and better at tracing where our suppliers get their materials and minerals. But most metals, like gold, they can be melted, and they can go through 3 or 4 laundromats, so that by the time you get it, it's hard to say. We've seen Tesla is trying to open their own mines so that they know where they're getting their lithium, where they're getting some of their other products. But there's a long ways for that before that'll start happening. And Apple is so large. It's 3.8 trillion market cap, 390 billion revenue every year. That's the GDP of South Africa. So it is getting so many minerals from so many countries, so many suppliers.
And I mean, Peter, I'm not sure what's happening with our line, but it is problematic. But let me try and squeeze this one question in as well. Let's talk about the types of minerals we're talking about here. You know, we understand, of course, collectively they're called the 3TGs. I would imagine that this lawsuit, we know it because of the size of Apple, as you've just spoken about the company now. I would imagine there's plenty more other companies that are using these kinds of minerals. We've seen how all of that played out in Sierra Leone with the blood diamond. What I'm trying to ask here is it possible then we can start seeing a stop in these countries opportunistically using, these miners in these various countries like the DRC in the near future, given this lawsuit?
I'll tell you what I believe. Things are getting better in the DRC and Zambia. They nationalized all their mines in the 70s. They saw it didn't work in the 80s and 90s. In the new millennium, they went back to traditional, registered, listed, highly transparent, organized companies that they can monitor very well. And the DRC's copper and cobalt production, almost all of that is coming from large professional companies that pay taxes, that help the communities, and that are very transparent, very easily to monitor and control. So I think as the DRC and Zambia allow more companies like this to come in and mine, they can squeeze out the syndicates and they squeeze out illegal, illicit mining.
And I mean, what is the best way to eliminate or even prevent, to some extent, illicit mining? As we've seen in many countries that you've also mentioned, we're also seeing some form of illegal mining here in South Africa where, most of the time workers are being exploited. Children are being used to mine some of these minerals in the most harrowing conditions. And of course, the conditions are not suitable, not only for the children that are mining, but also for the communities surrounding these mines.
We have some great examples right now here today. South Africa got rid of almost all their established mining regulations, imposed brand new regulations that were dreamed up by the ruling party that have devastated our mining industry and that have led to the creation of syndicates left and right. They've led to the flee of foreign capital. In the DRC and Zambia, they have gotten rid of all their bad legislation, and they are bringing in tens of billions of dollars of new investment that we're not. And that is stabilizing their production, growing their production, and making it transparent and beneficial to the whole country. So legislation has a big role to play here.
Speaking about legislation, many of these, lawsuits that we've seen against major companies that are primarily based, in your Western countries are being heard and held in Europe. Most of them, the prosecutions also happen there. Why is that? Why not be held in the countries in which those lawsuits emanate from?
It would be better if they emanated and stayed in the countries mentioned, but their systems, I think, aren't as sophisticated, and they have a better chance of being heard and also followed through. If a third world country makes outrageous demands, like we're now seeing, north of us, we're seeing some of the gold producers starting to sue American Barrick, etc. If they don't go to a recognized Western court, they have a very slim chance of, even if it passes in their own country, how do you now implement that decision? So you better implement in a third world country. Whereas first world, you can't implement a decision.
Yeah. How can countries be repatriated in as far as, just some of these mines that have gone unused for so long that are now being used illegally? We know, of course, of many frameworks that have been established, most of them sitting within the, the EU and the AU, etc. But how then do countries benefit for some of these mechanisms that have been installed? For instance, where a country is found, or a company rather, is found to have violated some of these frameworks, how then is that particular country then rehabilitated and also compensated?
We're on pretty new, fresh ground. I don't think there's many precedents for companies to recompense a country where those minerals came from. We know a lot of minerals are coming out of Africa by terrorists, syndicates, militia groups. And to track down which company eventually got those minerals and then how much, what was the fair price they should give back to that country. Do they give it for the full price of that metal? Do they give it for damages that could be 5 and 10 times as much? I think a country would be better off tweaking its legislation and begging large established first world mining companies, please come set up shop here. Help us develop our power systems, our schools, our infrastructure. By trying to sue Western companies, you're going to chase them away. And South Africa has shown what happens then. That makes the syndicates grow and stronger.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking about syndicates, one of the things that we haven't touched on is, who basically perpetuates some of this illegal smuggling of minerals in various countries. We know, of course, in the DRC, there's been a lot of talk that Rwanda is backing rebels like the M23, for instance, that international community needs to, go in harder on that particular country. But in South Africa, are there traces of these syndicates? Can we trace them back to individuals that are powerful? Can we trace them back to even countries that are powerful and working with some of these syndicates that we are seeing at a lower scale, I might add, in South Africa?
Those are great questions. And you've hit the nail on the head because they emanate from locals. And we know the DRC, historically, for decades and decades, those provinces are deeply embedded with an informal patronage network. And they reach all the way across the country. South Africa is now becoming embedded with these internal patronage networks. And it goes through from the presidency of these countries all the way down. And yes, if we can start stemming that flow, because that's what makes it legitimate for the syndicates to come in. So it's politicians that are granting licenses, that are turning a blind eye, that are corrupting the military and the police. So it's as much of the country's responsibility, but as you pointed out, Rwanda, yes, the United Nations can make sure Rwanda imposes much more stringent regulations on what they buy from across the border and how they do it.
And of course, Peter, just to add there that these are just allegations in as far as these countries are concerned in as far as their influence in what we are currently seeing from a form of corruption. But thank you so much for your views and your time on the program. Really do appreciate it. Peter Major, Director of Mining at Modern Corporation Solutions, just weighing in on what's happening in the DRC, particularly the DRC filing a lawsuit for tech giant Apple for purchasing what is called minerals from the DRC. Of course, these are alleged conflict minerals we are talking about.